I still remember the sound of the rain hitting the windshield of my Honda Civic as I pulled into our driveway that Tuesday evening. It was around 7:30, a full 3 hours before I was supposed to be off the clock at the firm. My boss, a typically unrelenting partner named Marcus, had looked at the bags under my eyes during our afternoon brief and told me to just pack up and go home. I had been pulling 80-hour weeks for 3 months straight, trying to secure a promotion that would finally let me and Sarah buy the house with the wraparound porch she kept saving on her Pinterest boards. I was exhausted, the kind of deep, bone-weary fatigue that makes your thoughts move like molasses. But I was also excited. I was going to surprise my wife. I was going to walk through the front door, order that expensive Thai food from the place down the street, and actually spend an evening holding her on the couch instead of staring at a laptop screen until my eyes bled. When I stepped into the house, the first thing that hit me was the silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Our townhome in the suburbs of Austin wasn't massive, but sound usually traveled. If Sarah was home, there was always something playing, a true crime podcast on her phone, indie folk music drifting from the kitchen, or the low hum of the television. Instead, there was nothing but the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway.
I dropped my briefcase by the shoe rack, making a conscious effort to be quiet because I thought maybe she was taking a nap. She'd been working stressful shifts at the clinic, and God knows we both needed the sleep. As I walked deeper into the house, I noticed Leo's shoes were gone from the entryway. Leo was my best friend from college, a guy I had known since we were 18 and sharing a cramped dorm room that smelled like cheap pizza and gym socks. 3 weeks ago, Leo's life had completely imploded. His startup had gone under, taking his life savings with it, and his landlord had evicted him with barely 48 hours' notice. When he called me from the parking lot of a diner, sounding smaller and more broken than I'd ever heard him, I didn't even hesitate. I told him he could crash on our living room couch for as long as he needed. Sarah had been hesitant at first, pointing out that our space was tight and that having a third person around might strain things, but I had begged her. I told her Leo was family, that he would do the same for me. She eventually relented, giving me that soft, supportive smile that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. I walked past the dark living room, noticing that the blanket on the couch was neatly folded, a sign that Leo was probably out trying to network or drowning his sorrows at a local dive bar. I felt a wave of relief that it would just be me and Sarah tonight. I missed her, truly missed her.
For the past month, we have been like ships passing in the night, our schedules completely mismatched, our conversations reduced to texts about grocery lists and utility bills. I started up the stairs, my hand sliding along the wooden railing. The house was dark except for a sliver of warm light escaping from the bottom of our bedroom door at the end of the hall. I smiled, imagining her wrapped up in the duvet, reading one of her historical romance novels. I took off my blazer, draping it over my arm, and reached for the brass doorknob. It didn't turn. It was locked. That was the first moment a cold drop of unease dripped into my stomach. We never locked our bedroom door. There was no reason to, even with Leo staying downstairs. It was an unwritten rule of privacy in our house. I frowned, knocking softly with my knuckles. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice sounding raspy in the quiet hallway. "Hey babe, it's me. I got off early." For a few seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, a sudden, frantic rustling sound came from inside the room. It sounded like sheets getting dragged across the mattress, followed by the heavy thud of something hitting the floor. "Sarah?" I called out again, louder this time, the unease turning into a sharp spike of anxiety. "Are you okay?" "Just a second," she called back. Her voice was too high, breathless, and laced with a panic that made my blood run cold. "Just give me a minute, Logan." I stood there on the carpeted landing, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The silence returned, but it was punctuated by muffled whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but there were two distinct tones. One was Sarah's frantic, hushed pitch. The other was a deeper, low murmur, a man's voice. My mind spun out of control, rejecting the obvious conclusion because it was too monstrous to process. I thought of a burglar, an intruder, some horrific home invasion scenario. Fear for her safety overrode everything else. I grabbed the doorknob again and rattled it violently. Sarah, open the door right now. Who is in there with you? Open the damn door. Logan, please, just go downstairs. I'll be right out, she begged, her voice cracking. I didn't wait. I backed up a step and threw my shoulder against the heavy wooden door. The frame groaned but held. Rage and adrenaline surged through my veins, wiping away the exhaustion of the past 3 months. I threw myself against it a second time, putting all my weight into it. The latch gave way with a loud, splintering crack, and the door swung wide open, banging against the interior wall. The scene that met my eyes is something that has been burned into the back of my eyelids every single night since. The overhead light was off, but the bedside lamps cast a harsh, amber glow across the room. Sarah was standing near the closet, clutching a silk robe tightly around her body, her face completely pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and shame. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her lipstick was smeared across her cheek. And then I looked at the bed. Leo was sitting on the edge of the mattress, trying to pull his jeans up. His shirt was missing, discarded on the floor, along with Sarah's underwear. He looked up at me, his face flushing a deep, guilty crimson, sweat glistening on his forehead under the lamplight. The guy who had stood next to me at my wedding, the guy who had held my hand when my father died, the guy I had invited into my home to protect him from the world. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved. The only sound was my own ragged, heavy breathing. The betrayal didn't hit me all at once. It came in waves, a suffocating pressure that squeezed the air right out of my lungs. I looked from Leo to Sarah, my eyes darting between the two people I trusted most in the entire world, trying to make the math work in my head, trying to find some alternative explanation that didn't involve my life being utterly destroyed. Logan, Sarah whispered, taking a tentative step toward me, her hand reaching out, trembling. Logan, please, it's not what it looks like. It was an accident. We didn't mean to. An accident? The word echoed in my mind, absurd and cruel. I looked at the unmade bed, the tangled sheets, the raw evidence of what they had been doing while I was sitting in a cubicle trying to build a future for us. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, but it came out as a choked, pathetic sob. Get out, I said. My voice was incredibly quiet, barely louder than a whisper, but it carried a weight that made both of them flinch. Logan, bro, listen to me, Leo started, holding his hands up in a defensive gesture as he finally got his jeans buttoned. He took a step toward me, his eyes pleading. I messed up. I'm so sorry, man. The stress, the drinks, we just... Don't call me man, I roared, the quietness evaporating into a deafening scream that shook the walls. Don't you dare look at me. Get the hell out of my house before I kill you. I stepped into the room, my fists clenching so hard my fingernails bit into my palms. Leo saw the look in my eyes and backed up against the wall, his hands still raised. He didn't say another word. He grabbed his shirt from the floor, scooped up his shoes, and practically bolted past me, keeping his back pressed against the hallway wall as he fled down the stairs. A few seconds later, the heavy thud of the front door slamming shut echoed through the house, followed by the distant roar of his car engine tearing down the street. He was gone, but the nightmare was just beginning. I turned my gaze back to Sarah, who had collapsed onto her knees by the closet, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she wept. I stood in the doorway of our broken sanctuary, looking at the wreckage of my entire life, wondering how a single Tuesday evening could turn everything I knew into ash. The sound of Sarah sobbing filled the bedroom, a wet, desperate noise that made my stomach turn. I didn't move. I felt like a statue, frozen in the doorway of a room that no longer belonged to me, looking at a woman I suddenly didn't recognize. The silence that followed the slamming of the front door was gone, replaced by this ugly, heavy grief that hung in the air like smoke. I watched her shoulders heave, watched the way her fingers dug into her hair, and for a terrifying second, a part of me wanted to go to her. A part of me wanted to kneel down, wrap my arms around her, and ask her who had hurt her, because my brain was still desperately trying to separate the wife I loved from the woman who had just shattered my world. But then my eyes drifted back to the bed. The sheets were still warm.
The indentation of Leo's body was clearly visible on the mattress. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the air out of my lungs and replacing it with a cold, sharp fury. "How long?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was flat, hollow, stripped of any warmth or emotion. Sarah didn't look up.
She just kept shaking her head, her face buried in her hands. "Logan, please, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. We didn't mean for this to happen." "How long, Sarah?" I repeated, louder this time, the flat tone giving way to a dangerous edge. I stepped further into the room, kicking Leo's discarded socks out of my way. The sight of them made me want to vomit. "Answer me. Was it just tonight? Was it last week? How long have you been sleeping with my best friend in our bed while I was out working myself into the ground for you?" She finally lifted her head. Her face was blotchy, her eyes bloodshot, her makeup smeared across her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. "It wasn't just tonight," she whispered, the confession tearing out of her like a physical pain. It started a week after he moved in." 2 weeks. 2 weeks of coming home late, kissing her forehead, asking her how her day was, and listening to her complain about how crowded the house felt with Leo downstairs. 2 weeks of sitting at the kitchen table with Leo, drinking a beer, talking about his job hunt, and telling him to hang in there because things would get better. All the while, they were looking at each other, sharing a secret that was rotting my life from the inside out. Every time I had felt guilty for leaving her alone to work late, every time I had apologized for being too tired to cook dinner, they had been together. I fell back against the dresser, the wood biting into my lower back. The betrayal was so vast, so complete, that I couldn't even grasp the edges of it. It felt like walking into your childhood home and finding out the walls were made of cardboard and the people inside were actors. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my life, about my history with Leo was a lie. "Why?" I asked, the word choking me. "Why him? Why did you do this to us? We were supposed to buy a house, Sarah. We were talking about starting a family next year. I was working 80 hours a week so you could have everything you ever wanted. Was that not enough? Was I not enough? You were never here," she suddenly screamed, her grief instantly morphing into an ugly, defensive anger. She stood up, gripping her robe around herself like armor, her chest heaving as she glared at me through her tears. "You're never here, Logan. You live at that office. I wake up alone, I eat dinner alone, I go to sleep alone. For months, I've been a ghost in this house. And then Leo got here, and he was actually present. He listened to me. He looked at me like I actually existed. I was lonely, Logan. I was so damn lonely." The words cut through me, but they didn't elicit the guilt she wanted me to feel. Instead, they fueled the fire burning in my chest. "You were lonely?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "So you slept with the guy I brought into our home to help? You slept with the guy who didn't have a roof over his head until I gave him one?"
I was working those hours for us, Sarah, for our future. I wasn't at a bar, I wasn't out partying, I was trying to build a life for us. If you were lonely, you talk to me. You don't open your legs for my best friend. "Logan," she gasped, as if the harshness of my words was the worst thing that had happened tonight. "Don't say my name," I said, pointing a finger at her. "Don't you dare act like the victim here. You made a choice. Both of you made a choice to destroy everything. And for what? A guy who can't even pay his own rent? A guy who used my charity to get into my wife's bed?" She closed her eyes, more tears spilling down her cheeks as the anger drained out of her, leaving her looking small and defeated again. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she sobbed, her voice dropping back into a desperate plea. "We were just talking in the kitchen one night. We had some wine. He told me how much he admired you, how lucky I was, and then it just shifted. We got caught up in it. We wanted to stop, Logan. I swear we did. Every single day we said it was the last time, but then you text saying you had to stay late again, and we fell into it. Please, Logan, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. People survive this. I love you.
I've always loved you. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized something terrifying. The woman standing before me, begging for forgiveness, was a stranger. The Sarah I loved would never have done this.
The Sarah I loved respected herself, respected me, and valued the vows we took in front of everyone we knew. This woman was a liar. She was someone who could look me in the eye after spending the afternoon in another man's arms and ask me what I wanted for dinner. The love didn't vanish. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But it twisted into something heavy and painful, a jagged piece of glass lodged in my throat. "There is no fixing this," I said, and the absolute certainty in my voice seemed to hit her harder than any of my screaming. "I'm going to a hotel tonight. Don't call me. Don't text me. If I see Leo's car anywhere near this neighborhood, I'm calling the police and having him dragged out for trespassing." "Logan, please don't leave," she begged, running toward me as I turned for the door. She grabbed my arm, her fingers gripping my forearm with surprising strength. "Don't leave like this. Let's just talk. Just stay downstairs tonight, please." I pulled my arm away from her grip with a force that made her stumble back against the bed. "Don't touch me," I spit out, the disgust evident in my voice. I grabbed my blazer from the floor where it had fallen during the confrontation, picked up my briefcase from the hallway, and walked down the stairs. Each step felt heavy, like my shoes were made of lead. The house felt different now. The air felt toxic, contaminated by the secret that had finally been brought into the light. I didn't look back, even though I could hear her footsteps following me to the top of the stairs, her voice calling my name over and over, a desperate, echoing refrain that followed me all the way out into the cold, rainy night. I got into my car, slammed the door, and started the engine. I didn't turn on the headlights right away. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the steering wheel, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't even slot the key into the ignition properly on the first try. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming a relentless, chaotic beat against the roof of the car. I looked up at the bedroom window. The light was still on, casting a soft glow onto the wet driveway. I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea what tomorrow looked like. My entire existence had been anchored by two people, my wife and my best friend. In the span of 20 minutes, both anchors had been ripped away, leaving me adrift in a black, violent ocean of betrayal. I shifted the car into reverse and backed out of the driveway, leaving the townhome and the wreckage of my life behind me in the dark. I spent the next 3 days in a sterile, dimly lit room at a Holiday Inn off the highway, staring at the popcorn ceiling until my eyes burned. The room smelled of stale cleaning products and old carpets, a depressing backdrop for the total collapse of my life. I didn't go to work. I called in sick, something I hadn't done in 4 years, telling Marcus I had a severe case of stomach flu. He told me to take all the time I needed, his voice full of genuine concern that made me feel even more hollow. If he only knew that the disease eating away at me wasn't a virus, but a poison injected straight into my veins by the two people I would have taken a bullet for. My phone was a war zone. Sarah had called me 64 times. Her texts were a relentless, chaotic cycle of emotional whiplash. First came the desperate pleas for forgiveness, paragraphs of text detailing how much she loved me, how much she regretted her weakness, how she was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild our marriage. Then came the anger, blaming me for abandoning her, accusing me of being cold and heartless for walking out without giving her a chance to explain. And then, finally, the bargaining, suggesting marriage counseling, weekend retreats, a total reset of our lives. Leo had texted too, just twice. The first message was a block of text filled with the word sorry, talking about how he hated himself, how he never meant to hurt me, how he was leaving town to give me space. The second message came 24 hours later, a single line that read, "Please don't let my mistake ruin what you and Sarah have." I deleted all of them. I didn't reply to a single word. Every time I looked at their names on my screen, a wave of intense nausea washed over me, followed immediately by a hot, blinding surge of adrenaline that made my chest tighten. I couldn't eat. I survived on black coffee from the lobby and bags of cheap vending machine chips that tasted like cardboard. By Friday morning, the numbness began to wear off, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity.
The initial shock had receded, leaving behind a sharp, jagged landscape of reality. I was 32 years old. I had spent nearly a decade building a life with a woman who didn't exist. I had sacrificed my sleep, my health, and my youth to provide for a future that had been burned to the ground in a couple of weeks. I realized then that I couldn't stay in that hotel room forever. I needed answers, not about the why. I didn't care about her excuses anymore, but about the how. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went before I could figure out how to cut it out. I drove back to the townhome at 11 o'clock on Friday morning, knowing Sarah would be at the clinic for her shift. The neighborhood was quiet, the suburban streets peaceful under the bright Texas sun. It felt surreal, almost offensive, that the world was continuing to turn so normally when my entire universe had been decimated. When I walked through the front door, the house was freezing. Sarah had turned the AC down low, a habit she always had when she was stressed.
The air felt stale, heavy with the lingering scent of her perfume and the distinct absence of life. I walked upstairs, my boots heavy on the carpet, and entered our bedroom. She had cleaned it. The bed was made perfectly, the sheets pulled tight, the discarded clothes gone. It looked like a showroom in a furniture store, completely devoid of the violence that had taken place here 3 nights ago. I sat down at the small built-in desk in the corner of the room where we kept our shared iMac. My hands were steady now, driven by a grim, purposeful focus. I turned on the computer, logging into our shared network. We had never kept secrets from each other. We knew each other's passwords, shared an iCloud account for photos, and had our calendar synced. It was a level of trust I had taken pride in. Now it was my greatest weapon. I opened the synced messaging app on the desktop. Because Leo had been using our guest Wi-Fi, his phone had automatically backed up certain data strings to the local network, and Sarah's laptop, which was sitting on the nightstand, was linked to the main account. It took me less than 10 minutes to bypass the basic privacy walls. I found the thread between them. Seeing the words written out on the screen was a different kind of torture than catching them in person. It was calculated. It was deliberate. The messages didn't start 2 weeks ago.
They started almost immediately after Leo moved in. Just 3 days after I had hugged him in our driveway and told him my house was his house. I can't stop thinking about what happened in the kitchen after Logan went to sleep. Leo had texted her on a Thursday night while I was pulling an all-nighter at the firm. Me neither, Sarah had replied. I feel so guilty, but when he's gone, the house feels so empty. You make it feel alive. I scrolled further down, the dates blurring together, a horrific timeline of my own blindness. They had texted while I was sitting across the table from them. They had texted while I was in the shower. There were photos, too, images of my wife in our bathroom sent to my best friend while I was at work. But the message that broke something permanent inside me was from a week ago. Leo had written, "He's so oblivious. He called me today to ask if I needed help with my resume while I was lying right next to you." Sarah's response was a single line. "Let's just enjoy it while we can. He doesn't need to know." I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes, feeling a part of my soul wither and die. He's so oblivious. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had pitied me. They had mocked my trust, viewed my work ethic as a convenience, and treated my love as a weakness to be exploited. Every sacrifice I had made for our future had been used as currency to fund their little playground. The sadness evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, glittering rage that felt as solid as a block of ice. I didn't want to cry anymore. I didn't want to yell. I wanted to destroy them. Not physically, that was beneath me, and it would give them a way to play the victims. No, I wanted to dismantle their lives with the same surgical precision they had used to dismantle mine. I plugged a thumb drive into the side of the computer and copied every single text message, every single photo, and every single call log. I exported the data calmly, watching the progress bar tick up to 100%. When it was finished, I ejected the drive and slid it into my pocket. I stood up from the desk, looking around the bedroom one last time. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene. I walked down the stairs, but I didn't leave the house this time. I walked into the kitchen, sat down at the island, and opened my laptop. It was time to start drafting the paperwork. I called a divorce attorney my colleague had recommended months ago during a casual conversation about another partner's split. The lawyer, a sharp-voiced woman named Eleanor, answered on the third ring. I told her everything, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion, reading her the exact dates and timelines I had just uncovered. She listened in silence, occasionally interrupting to ask a specific question about our assets, our bank accounts, and the title to the townhome.
We can file for a fault-based divorce on the grounds of adultery, Eleanor said, her voice professional and reassuring. With the evidence you have, she won't have a leg to stand on regarding the property or alimony. But Logan, you need to be prepared. Once we serve her, things will get ugly very fast. Good, I said, looking at my reflection in the dark microwave door. Let it get ugly. I spent the next 2 hours filling out forms, transferring half of the money from our joint savings account into a new private account I had opened that morning, and removing my name from the lease agreement for Leo's storage unit that I had co-signed out of pity. I was cutting every tie, pulling every thread, preparing to drop the hammer. As I was finishing up, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I looked out the kitchen window. It wasn't Sarah's SUV. It was an old, battered sedan I didn't recognize. The passenger door opened, and Leo stepped out, looking disheveled, his head hanging low as he carried a small duffel bag. He had come back to get the rest of his things while he thought I was at work. A dark, vicious smile spread across my face. I stood up from the stool, walked over to the front door, and waited. I stood right behind the heavy wooden front door, my hand resting on the brass deadbolt. Through the frosted glass panel, I watched Leo's distorted shadow stretch across the porch. He hesitated for a long moment, his silhouette shifting as he reached into his pocket for the spare key I had given him. The sound of the key scraping against the lock cylinder echoed sharply through the quiet entryway. The lock turned with a heavy click. The door swung inward, and Leo stepped across the threshold, his eyes glued to the floor as if he could avoid facing his own reflection in the hallway mirror. He was wearing the same wrinkled shirt from Tuesday night, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his duffel bag. He didn't notice me until he closed the door behind him and turned toward the stairs. When our eyes met, he froze instantly, his jaw dropping slightly as his face drained of what little color it had. He took a panicked step backward, his back hitting the solid wood of the front door. "Logan," he stammered, his voice cracking like a terrified teenager. I didn't think you'd be here. I just came to get my laptop and the rest of my clothes. I'll be out of your hair in 5 minutes, I swear." I didn't move an inch. I kept my arms crossed over my chest, staring at him with a detachment that seemed to terrify him more than if I had lunged at his throat. "Look at you," I said, my voice deadpan and quiet. "You look pathetic." He swallowed hard, nervously shifting the weight of the duffel bag on his shoulder. "Look, man, I know you hate me. You have every right to. I've been staying at a motel by the airport, hating myself every second. What I did to you, it's the worst mistake of my life. Stop calling it a mistake, Leo," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. A mistake is missing a turn on the highway. What you did was sit at my dinner table, drink my whiskey, and wait for my garage door to close so you could crawl into my bed." He looked down at his shoes, his lower lip trembling. "I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. I ruined the best friendship I ever had." "Friendship?" I let out a short, humorless laugh that cut through the tension like a knife. "We weren't friends. A friend doesn't text a man's wife while sitting across from him, mocking him for being oblivious. A friend doesn't look at someone working 80 hours a week to survive and treat their absence as an invitation." Leo's head snapped up, his eyes widening with a sudden, fresh wave of panic. How do you know about that?" I pulled the black thumb drive out of my pocket and held it up between my thumb and forefinger. "I backed up the iMac data this morning, Leo. I read every single text. I saw the photos. I saw the message where you laughed at me for calling to help you with your resume while you were lying next to Sarah." He went completely pale, his hands starting to shake so badly he dropped his duffel bag onto the hardwood floor with a dull thud. "Logan, please, don't do anything crazy." "I'm not going to do anything crazy," I said, dropping the thumb drive back into my pocket. Doing something crazy implies a lack of control. I have never been more in control of my life than I am right now. I'm going to divorce Sarah. I'm taking the townhome, the savings, and every shred of dignity she has left. And as for you, please, man, I have nothing left, he begged, his voice dropping into a desperate whine. My company is gone. I'm broke. I'm sleeping in a car half the time. If you ruin my reputation, I'll never get another job in this industry. Then I guess you should have thought about that before you destroyed the only home you had, I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh, cold whisper. I already called the storage facility. I took my name off your co-signed lease this morning. They're locking your unit at the end of the business day for non-payment. Whatever is in there is going to auction. And as for your industry, Marcus knows every venture capitalist in Austin. I'm having lunch with him on Monday, and I'm bringing a printed transcript of your little text messages. You won't find a single dime of funding in this state for the rest of your life. Logan, you can't do this, Leo yelled, taking a step toward me, his face twisting into a mix of anger and sheer desperation. You're destroying my entire future. You destroyed mine on Tuesday night, I shouted back, finally letting the rage crack through my icy exterior. You came into my house, accepted my charity, and treated my life like a joke. Get your things and get out of my sight before I forget my own rules and throw you out that window. He stared at me for a few agonizing seconds, realizing there was no negotiation left, no apology that could fix the damage he had done. He saw the absolute finality in my eyes. Slowly, he reached down, picked up his duffel bag, and walked past me toward the stairs to grab his remaining belongings from the guest room. He didn't look at me when he came back down 5 minutes later, his arms full of loose chargers and clothes. He opened the front door and walked out into the Texas heat, leaving my life for the final time. 2 hours later, Sarah's SUV pulled into the driveway. I was sitting at the kitchen island, a neat stack of legal documents resting on the granite countertop in front of me. The front door opened and she walked in, carrying a bag of takeout. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me sitting there. Her eyes darted from me to the papers on the counter, and the fragile hope that had briefly lit up her face instantly vanished. "Logan," she whispered, closing the door softly behind her. "You're home. I'm here to drop these off," I said, tapping my fingers against the top page of the divorce petition. "My lawyer, Eleanor, already sent a digital copy to your email, but I wanted to make sure you had the physical copy to sign." She dropped the takeout bag on the entryway table and rushed into the kitchen, her eyes flooding with tears. "No, Logan, please, don't do this." "We haven't even talked. You've been gone for days. We can go to counseling. I already looked up a therapist near the clinic." "It's over, Sarah," I interrupted, my voice perfectly level. "I know about everything. I know it didn't start 2 weeks ago. I know about the kitchen. I know about the messages. I know you both laughed at me for being oblivious." She froze, her hand hovering over the kitchen island, her breath hitching in her throat. You looked at the computer?" "I looked at the truth," I said, standing up from the stool. "I looked at the woman I spent 7 years of my life protecting and realizing she was a stranger. You blamed my hours, Sarah. You blamed my absence. But the truth is, you're just a coward. You chose the easiest, ugliest path because you wanted to feel something, and you didn't care who you had to bleed to get it." "Logan, I love you," she sobbed, reaching out to grab my hand, but I stepped back, out of her reach. "I swear I love you. It was a terrible mistake. I was lost." "If you loved me, you would have respected me enough to leave before you brought another man into our bed," I said, picking up my car keys from the counter. "The papers outline the division of property. I'm keeping the townhome. You have until Sunday night to pack your things and find somewhere else to sleep. If you aren't gone by then, Eleanor will have the eviction notice served at your clinic in front of your coworkers." She collapsed against the counter, burying her face in her hands, her loud, racking sobs echoing through the empty kitchen. It was the exact same sound from Tuesday night, but this time, it didn't move me. It didn't make me want to hold her. It just sounded like noise. I walked past her, opening the front door and stepping out onto the porch. The afternoon sun was blinding, casting long, sharp shadows across the driveway. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. The betrayal had cut deep, leaving a scar that would probably dictate how I trusted people for the rest of my life. They had trapped themselves in their own web of lies, expecting me to remain the blind, oblivious husband who kept the lights on while they played their games. But the game was over. I was finally moving forward, leaving the wreckage behind me,
ready to rebuild a life that was entirely my own.